Hello YouTube, Dave here again. So a week ago, at the time I'm uploading this video and recording it, I had posted a video talking about my interest in getting back into running a D&D 3.5 campaign. Something that I never thought was going to happen. I've stated several times on this channel that I was done with 3.5, but watching a few other channels talking about like their experiences with 3.5 or giving some 3.5 pointer videos, it got me a little bit nostalgic. And looking as I was doing my Age of Worms review, I really felt that the fact that I didn't get to run the third adventure path, the final adventure path in Dungeon Magazine, for the physical print Dungeon Magazine anyway, Savage Tide, it really started to feel more and more like something was missing. So I actually got a really good response from that 3.5 announcement video, and I'm really kind of blown away by people's sort of interest in it. I know 3.5 was a very popular edition, so it was interesting to see the people that, that's still their preferred edition to this day. It was also interesting to see the number of people that, they started with 5th, so they never played 3.5. They know very little or next to nothing about it. So part of the series of videos that I want to record, sort of chronicling my journey getting back into D&D 3.5, I thought it'd be kind of cool to go through the player's handbook, not comprehensively or anything, but just sort of go through it and talk about some of the major differences. I might do multiple videos in this series, so, I'm not going to call this part 1 right now because I also might not, but I don't want to focus on everything because the first take of this video, I got about a third of the way through the stuff that I wanted to talk about, and it was already at 39 minutes. So I want to go through things a little bit quicker in this video, but I might always do a part 2 or even part 3, so we'll sort of see how that goes. There are some things also from the Dungeon Master's Guide that I want to do videos on, maybe some stuff from the Monster Manual that I want to do videos on, so we'll sort of touch on all that as we go. So if, there are differences that between 3.5 and 5th that I don't talk about in this video, that's fine. You can certainly leave it in the comments, but just know this isn't a comprehensive video by any stretch of the imagination because, again, we would be here for a very, very long time, and a lot of it is kind of minorish, so it's just not worth going into. So let's just slide the 5th edition Player's Handbook out of the way and dive right into the 3.5 Player's Handbook. So the first thing is ability scores. They function very similarly to what we have in D&D 3.5. Let's just zoom in just a smidge there. So again, they function very similarly to what we have in 5th edition. So 10 gives you a modifier of 0, every +2 above that gives you +1, so on and so forth, and every -2 that you have gives you a negative. But one of the important things with ability scores in the 3.5 is if you're a spellcaster, you can actually gain additional spell slots based on how high your spellcasting modifier is, or your spellcasting ability is. So if you have a 12 or higher, for example, you start gaining like a 1 first level spell slot, and again, the higher your score goes, the more spell slots that you get as a bonus. Also, you have to have an ability score of 10 plus the spell level in order to actually be able to cast a spell. So, for example, if you have an 8 or 9 intelligence or wisdom or whatever the spellcasting attribute is for the class you want to take a part of, you can't cast any spells because a 0 level spell requires a minimum of a 10 in that attribute. So it's interesting because I had a character or a player in a 5th edition game play a ranger with an 8 wisdom. So when they were casting spells, if they was something like that, was like heal, for example, 1d8 plus their ability score modifier, it was actually 1d8 -1. So like we would make jokes about how, just bad the healing was or how bad the spellcasting was. But in 3.5, you literally could not do that. You would have to have 10 plus the ability score. So if you are a wizard and you want to be able to cast 9th level spells, you have to have a 19 intelligence. So that's basically how that works. For races, the biggest thing with races is the fact that your non-human races will actually have a negative attribute as well as a positive one. So in 5th edition, your races will give you like +2 to a stat and maybe +1 to another stat. There are some differences or some variance in that, but that's basically how it works. In 3.5, you have, for example, dwarves get +2 to their constitution, but -2 to their charisma. Elves get +2 to their dexterity because they are a nimble, agile, graceful race of humanoids, but they're thin, they're frail, they're not physically hardy like other races are, so they get +2 to their dexterity, but they get -2 to their constitution. So it balances out a little bit more. Now the half-orc gets a little bit screwed because they get +2 to strength, and they're the only player's handbook race that gets +2 to strength, which is great for melee fighters with, you know, weapons because it's strength-based, but they also get -2 to their intelligence and charisma. So they get a little bit, they get the short end of the stick that way, but the +2 to strength really is sort of a big deal. So again, that sort of balances out. I actually kind of prefer having some penalties on top of the bonuses just to even things out a little bit. Humans don't gain any attribute score increases, but they get extra skill points and an extra feat, which we'll talk a little bit about a little bit later. Now, classes, I'm not going to go into all the differences in all the classes because, again, there's just a lot to go through, and that's the thing that took, you know, almost half an hour to go through, so I'm not really going to do that for all the classes. I might just touch on a few things. So Barbarians Rage, for example, in 5th edition, you get like a set amount of damage that you deal whenever you go into a rage, and then you also resist damage, so you take half damage from physical attacks while you're raging. Barbarians get damage reduction starting at 7th level. 7th level. So they subtract 1 from any time they take physical damage. Doesn't matter if they're raging or not. That gets up to 5 points off. It's not the greatest, but it's not bad either. But with their rage, instead of it just being a set bonus of damage, they get +2 to their strength, or +4 to their strength, +4 to their constitution score. So they actually get +2 to the hit and to damage, and they also get +2 hit points per level. Now, the important thing to note about that is when you end your rage, those ability score increases go away, meaning you lose 2 hit points per level. So if you're a barbarian, you want to be careful because when you come out of a rage, you could drop yourself into a situation where you were now dying. So one thing to keep in mind there, bards suck in 3.5. They're a great support class and nothing else. They can do a little bit of everything, but they can't do anything particularly well. Their spells only go up to 6th level. They don't have a great spell list. They don't do a lot of damage. They have, a great skill list they could choose from, but they have, okay skill points. They're just not a good class. Clerics, the big thing about clerics is with their spell casting, they gain a domain spell for each of their spell levels that they choose from the list provided by the domains that they take. So they get 2 domains, but they can only choose 1 domain spell that they can put into that +1 that you see there. The other big thing with clerics is that they can spontaneously cast either cure spells, so spells with cure in the title, like Cure Light Wounds, Cure Moderate Wounds, Cure Serious Wounds, Mass Cure Light Wounds, or they can spontaneously cast Inflict spells, so Inflict Light Wounds, Inflict Moderate Wounds, Inflict, Serious Wounds, Mass Inflict. I don't know if there's a Mass Inflict spell, but that's determined on your alignment. So if you're good, you can spontaneously cast your Cure spells. If you're evil, you can spontaneously cast Inflict spells. If you are neutral, you have to choose at character creation whether you are going to be able to spontaneously cast Cure or Inflict spells, and once that decision is made, it is locked in. So what that means is that you don't have to memorize Cure Light Wounds or Cure Moderate Wounds. You never have to memorize those spells. What you can do is substitute out a spell that you have prepared but haven't cast yet for that Cure spell. So if you have Bless, for example, but you really need to cure a party member that's unconscious, you can say, instead of casting Bless, I will cast Cure Light Wounds and go on from there. So that's sort of the big thing. Again, I can explain that in more detail if you wish in the comment section if you ask, or I can even do a separate video about it if you really want. But that's the gist of it. It frees up the spells that you can prepare because clerics, druids, and wizards for like full spell casting classes, they have to prepare their spells specifically. So if they have 2 first level spell slots, they have to choose which 2 spells use those spell slots. So if you're a first level wizard, or if you're a wizard and you have 2 first level spell slots, you can either, if you wanted to cast like Magic Missile, you could do that, but you'd have to choose how many times you have that prepared. So you can cast Magic Missile you can memorize it with one of those spell slots, and then a second spell, or you can have 2 Magic Missiles, but you're locked into that selection. So with the clerics, you can kind of do that, but you also have a little bit of flexibility because you can swap out any of your prepared spells for a cure spell, which has to have cure in the name, of equal or lesser level. So we've got that going for them. Pretty cool. Druids, their wild shape is something I'll probably have to do a separate video on because it's changed. The wording and the way the rules work has changed a lot. Fighters, Fighters have a very short class description. It starts on the bottom quarter of page 37 and it ends halfway through page 39. The big thing about fighters is they get a ton of bonus feats. So they're a bit more customizable in terms of, you know, what they choose for feats. They are limited what the bonus feats can be, but there's a ton of them, and each feat will say in its description if a fighter can take it as their bonus feats. So fighters are great if you want to make like an archer, or you want to make like a 2-up in fighting specialist, or you want to make like a chain fighter with a spike chain that can do like whirlwind attacks. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with fighters that way. Otherwise, like, so they're a pretty easy class to do because like their description is less than 2 pages. Monks, I've never been a fan of monks, so I've never really looked into them. Their big thing is they can do flurry of blows, which grants them more attacks than any other class, but their bonuses are different. So they'll have like greater penalties and stuff like that. But again, I could do another video on that if you wish. I'm just not big on monks. Paladins, a big thing about paladins. I know I said I was going to do something for every class, but I'm going to try to do it quickly. Paladins get the ability to smite evil. Specifically, has to be an evil NPC or monster with evil in its alignment. It's not like smite in 5th edition where you can choose to smite after you know that you hit. You actually have to declare your smiting before you make your attack roll. You can only smite a certain number of times per day, starting at once per day at 1st level and up to 5 times per day at 20th level. I think there are feats that can let you expand beyond that, but you have to declare that you are using smite attack before, or smite evil before you actually make the attack roll. The benefit is you actually get to add your charisma modifier to the attack roll, and then you deal extra damage equal to your level. This damage actually does multiply when you score a critical hit, which is really, really cool. Ranger's favorite enemy deals damage to the targets, so that's better than 5th edition already. Again, I can do a more specific video later on if you want. Rogue sneak attack is a lot different than it is in D&D 5th edition. In D&D 5th edition, to get your sneak attack off, you only need to have an allied enemy or an allied character within 5 feet of the target, and doesn't matter if you're using a ranged weapon or a melee weapon. You just have to have a friendly target or friendly ally unit within 5 feet of the person you're attacking. With 5th edition or 3.5, it's a lot different. You either have to catch them flat-footed, meaning that they're unaware, they're sort of oblivious to the attack, and that's really the only way you can decently get a sneak attack off with a ranged weapon, which if you're using a ranged weapon, you also have to be within 30 feet, and they have to be flat-footed or otherwise unable to detect that you're there. If you want a sneak attack with a melee weapon, you have to either catch them unaware or you have to flank them. And I'll talk more about flanking when we get into the combat section, but needless to say that to get a rogue sneak attack off in 3.5, you do have to work a little bit harder to earn it. So I appreciate that over the way that it's done in 5th edition. Sneak attack damage also does not multiply on a critical hit. It specifies it here in the description because it's referred to as precision damage. Sorcerers, they can cast their spells spontaneously. Otherwise, they're not much different from a wizard. They do gain spell level. They gain more spell slots than a wizard does, and they can cast their spells spontaneously, so they don't have to prepare them ahead of time. The downside is that they gain new spell levels 1 level later than a wizard would, but that's basically it. And then the wizard has the ability at 1st level, at character creation, you can choose to specialize in a school of magic. If you specialize in a school of magic, you gain an additional spell per spell level that has to be from that school of magic. So if you wanted to be an enchanter, for each spell level that you have, like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, so on, you can gain an extra spell of that level, but it has to be from the school that you specialize in, so in this case, enchantment. When you choose to specialize, and you don't have to, but if you choose to specialize, you actually have to give up 2 other schools of magic. They're considered to be your prohibited schools, meaning that you can never learn spells from those schools of magic. So you could be an enchanter, but you have to give up 2. So let's just say we give up necromancy and abjuration. So you can never choose spells from those schools of magic, but you gain additional enchantment spells that you can cast for each level. So there's sort of a benefit to that. If you can never give up divination magic, and you can never give up universal, because universal is not technically a school of magic, but some spells just don't have a school of magic that they're associated with. So with divination, you can never give up divination. However, if you specialize in divination spells, you only have to give up 1 school of magic instead of 2. So because you can't drop it from your list, if you specialize in it, you don't actually have to give up as much. So it's a cool little trade-off there. So that's kind of neat. So that is the basics with classes. We also have multi-classing in 3.5 that is quite a bit different than what it is in 5th, but I think that'll be the subject of a different video because there's sort of a little bit to get into when it comes to that. So I'm not going to really touch on it here. Skills. So in 5th edition, you gain proficiency in skills based on your race for several races, your class, and your background, as well as a few that you can choose based on your intelligence modifier. If you are trained in a skill, you just add your proficiency bonus to it on top of the ability score modifier and any other pertinent modifiers that get added onto it from items or stuff like that. And that's how you go in 5th edition. In 3.5, you actually have to buy ranks in skills. So each class gains a certain number of skills per level. So Barbarian, for example, at every level they gain 4 plus their intelligence modifier. It's always going to be plus your intelligence modifier, but different classes have different amounts of skills that they gain. At first level, you actually multiply those numbers by 4 because you're considered to have a bit more of a wider range of training before you strike out into the world. And then second level and every level thereafter, you gain just like the 4 plus intelligence modifier, like for the Barbarian. So some classes get up to 6 plus intelligence modifier. The Rogue gets 8 plus intelligence modifier. So the Rogue gains the most number of skill points in the game. And then some classes only get 2 plus their intelligence modifier. If you have a negative intelligence modifier, you do have to factor that in. However, you do gain a minimum of 1 skill point per level, even if your intelligence modifier is abysmal. So you're always going to gain at least 1 skill point, but hopefully you'll gain a few more. So we have the different skills here. So each class has their own list of skills that are considered to be class skills. And if it's not a class skill, it's considered to be a cross-class skill. For class skills, for each skill point that you spend on a class skill, you gain 1 rank in the skill. So 1 rank is enough to consider you to be trained in a skill, but DCs for skill checks do level or do increase as you level. So, having 1 rank at higher levels is going to be more or less useless. For a lot of things, but if it's class skill, for every point that you spend on a class skill, you gain 1 rank. Each rank gives you a +1 modifier on your skill rolls. The maximum number of points you can spend on a class skill is equal to your level +3. So at first level, you can have up to 4 points in a skill that's considered a class skill. At second level, you can have 5, and so on and so forth. If you put points into a non-class skill, or what's called a cross-class skill, it functions quite a bit differently. So to buy a rank in cross-class skills, each skill point that you put into a cross-class skill is equal to only half a rank. So for every 2 skill points that you put into a cross-class skill, you gain 1 rank. You can also only have a number of ranks in a cross-class skill equal to half of the number that you can have in a class skill. So at first level, you can spend 4 points to get 4 ranks in a class skill, or you can spend 4 points to gain 2 ranks in a cross-class skill, and 2 is the highest you can have at first level. If you only have half a rank, it doesn't add anything to the checks, and it doesn't if you only have half a rank in a skill, like just 1/2 rank, it doesn't qualify as you being trained. So you have to spend your skill points whenever you gain a level. Basically, you want to spend, you want to find out how many skill points you have, choose that number of class skills, and just try to keep them maxed, basically. Because cross-class skills really aren't worth taking because you have to spend double the points to get 1 rank, and you can only have half as many ranks in a cross-class skill as a class skill. So that's sort of the thing about skills. So for feats are a huge part of D&D 3.5. In 5th edition, they're an optional thing, and they tend to be pretty decent. They tend to give you some pretty good abilities for choosing them to gain a feat in 5th edition if the DM allows it. When you gain an increase to your attributes, you can forego those in order to gain a feat. In 5th edition, you gain a feat starting off at first level, so everyone gets a feat at first level, and then you gain feats at 3rd level and every 3 levels thereafter. You can choose from the list here as long as you meet the prerequisites. Fighters gain bonus feats, again, as they go up in level, so you can sort of choose. And again, if you're looking at the chart here, if you see one with the number 1 over it, it means that you can select it as a bonus feat for fighters. So yeah, there's a ton of them. They tend to be a little bit more minor in terms of what bonuses or benefits they convey. So they could be something like a +2 on certain skill checks, or +1 on attack rolls, or bonuses on some damage rolls. You know, like dodge, you can choose a target and gain +1 armor class against that target for the round. Stuff like that. So they tend to be more minor, but there's more of them, and several feats require other feats as prerequisites. So something like, you know, whirlwind attack, which you can basically just swing around, spin around, and attack everyone within reach of your weapon. In order to get that, you have to have several other feats as prereqs. So some of the really good feats require some of the not so great feats as requirements to get there. So you have to sort of build towards them as you go. That kind of gave rise to the concept of character builds in the first place. Because in earlier editions, you never really had to worry about stuff like that. So if you're someone who likes character building and planning out character builds from 1st to 20th level, 3rd edition is kind of where that started. So again, I'm not going to go into the specifics of feats, but there's, you know, a few of them, and there's quite a few of them. And again, they're more minor than they are in 5th edition, but they are an integral part of the game in 3.5 as opposed to being optional like they are in D&D 5th edition. So the next thing I want to talk about are weapons and armor. So the equipment section here. So weapons, in D&D 3.5, if you look at the weapons here, you'll see on the chart, you'll have critical. So you'll see ×2, but this one here for the dagger says 19-20/2. So when you make attack rolls in D&D 3.5, you have what's called a critical threat range. And that's either 20 if there's no number specified. So as you see, anything that's just ×2 or ×3 or whatever, you only can potentially get that multiplier if you roll a natural 20. But other weapons will have a wider range. So for example, most swords, like a long sword, short sword, daggers, if you roll a 19 or 20 on the die, and you hit, the natural 20 will always hit, and always can be considered to be a chance for a critical. But if you have a weapon that gives you a wider range, and you roll the number that corresponds, so if you're using a scimitar, and you roll an 18 on the die, 18, 19, or 20, you score what's called a chance for a critical. And what you have to do after that is actually confirm the critical. And the way you do that is you make a second attack roll using the exact same bonus that you used on the roll that generated the chance for a critical. And if you hit, if your number that you roll plus those bonuses equals or exceeds the target's armor class, you confirm the critical. This is kind of a clunky system, and I will say that I do prefer the 5th edition way of just scoring a critical on a roll of a natural 20, because you just do it, right? In 5th edition, getting a chance for a critical can always be really exciting, but if you fail on the confirmation roll, it does kind of suck. The difference here is that some weapons will actually do ×3 or ×4 multipliers if they score a critical. So, you know, certain weapons, it's, you know, really, you know, if you get a critical, it can really hurt. Like axes are, you know, usually ×3, and picks can be up to ×4, which is crazy. So when you multiply damage, you roll, you basically, you can either roll 2 dice or roll like the appropriate number of dice, or you can just roll the damage normally and then multiply it by the multiplier. I believe the default way to do it is to roll, like if you do 1d8 but you get a ×2 critical, I think you roll 2d8. But you also get to multiply your bonuses. And unlike 5th edition, where your strength gets added after you roll your dice damage, which the dice damage gets doubled, but the strength modifier doesn't. In this edition, your strength modifier and anything that you add, like the Paladin Smite, or +1 for magical weapons, or +1, 2, 3, or 4, 5 for magical weapons, all that stuff multiplies by the amount shown for the weapon. So it's a little bit different that way. And the multiplying the modifiers is usually the saving grace of rolling crappy numbers on your weapon dice for a critical, because of how high that can be, especially for a Paladin's Smite. You know, a 10th level Paladin smiting and getting a critical with a longsword is adding +20 because it's their level, and then they get to multiply that. A rogue sneak attack is precision damage, and precision damage does not multiply on a critical. So again, that specifies it in the ability, but I just want to sort of go over how that works. So if you have a weapon that says 19-20/2, If you roll a 19 or a 20 on the die, you get a chance for a critical. You then have to make a second attack roll using the exact same modifiers as the one that you just rolled. And if you hit, then you actually get to do your critical damage. So that's basically how that works. The next thing is armor and armor class. So we've got our armor here, we've got our charts. Each armor has a maximum dexterity bonus that you can add. In 5th edition, you have light, medium, and heavy armor. Light armor allows you to add your dex modifier regardless of what it is, although your stats do cap at 20 in 5th edition, they do not in 3.5. So you can always add your dex modifier to light armor. With medium armor in 5th edition, you can only add up to maximum +2. So if you had a dex modifier of +3, but you're wearing medium armor, you can only add 2 of it to your armor class. And with heavy armor in 5th edition, you can't add any dex modifier whatsoever. In 5th edition, you actually get a maximum dex bonus based off the individual suit of armor. So what's interesting is that there are some medium armors where you can add +4 for your dex modifier if your dex is that high, or +3. Only one of them actually gives you only a maximum +2, so it's kind of interesting. And even heavy armor, so if you're wearing banded mail or full plate mail, you can actually add +1 dex modifier if you have it. So it's kind of neat that, you know, like they're done a little bit differently there. The other big thing with armor class in D&D 3.5 is there are 3 different armor class types that you have to be aware of. There's your standard armor class, which is 10 plus your armor bonus, plus your shield bonus if you have one, plus your dexterity bonus if you can add one to your armor type, and then any bonuses you get for things like a ring of protection, magical armor, magical shield, so on and so forth. So that's like standard armor class. It's the same kind of formula we're used to in D&D 5th edition. However, you also have a touch armor class and a flat-footed armor class. So touch armor class is for abilities like a Lich's Paralyzing Grasp, or like spell attacks like Shocking Grasp or Chill Touch that actually require you to physically make contact with the person you're targeting. In that version of flat-footed armor class, you don't actually apply your armor bonus whatsoever. Shield bonus still applies because a shield is separate from the physical body, but your actual armor bonus does not apply. You just have to make contact with the person. You don't actually have to get through the armor. So you add 10 plus your dex modifier plus things like ring of protection, stuff like that, but your actual armor bonus does not apply. Flat-footed is essentially the opposite. So you don't get to add your dex modifier because like your armor still applies. Like if someone catches you flat-footed and they try to stab you and you're wearing plate armor, they still have to get through the armor to actually inflict damage, as opposed to like a spell where all you have to do is just touch the body itself. So a flat-footed armor class is 10 plus your armor bonus. I don't think you get your shield bonus to your flat-footed armor class, though, because shield is usually something where you're reacting, and flat-footed you can't react. But if you have like a ring of protection or you know, stuff like that, that will also apply to your flat-footed armor class. So touch armor class is everything minus your dexterity, essentially, or minus your armor. So you get your dexterity, but you don't get your armor bonus. Flat-footed, you get your armor bonus, but you don't get your dexterity. So the 3 different types to know about there. Yeah, so that's sort of the main things for combat. I think I might actually do combat-related stuff in a separate video. So that's just sort of the gist of the basics, starting to go through the player's handbook. So I think we're going to do a part 2 because we're already closing in on half an hour in this particular video. So I'll have part 2 up sometime later, either this week or probably like the next week if you're watching this when it initially uploads. So yeah, I'll try to have a part 2 where I go over the combat and just go over some spell stuff in the next video. And then I also want to do a video on some of the stuff in the Dungeon Master's Guide and a couple things in the Monster Manual. So we'll get to those in a separate series of videos. But for now, we went over the basics of some of the major differences between races, some of the class stuff, as well as skills. Talked a little bit about feats and armor class and critical like threat ranges and stuff like that for weapons. So that is part 1 of my refamiliarizing myself with 3.5 series. I guess I call it like a reintroduction to 3.5. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. If there's any questions that you have related to the topics that I've already covered in this video, feel free to just post them in the comments below, and I will try my best to I know I'm not as attentive to the comment section as I'd like to be, but just leave your questions in the comment section. I'll try to get to them. If you want to ask questions about something that I haven't covered yet, or it's in chapters that like from the combat section beyond, certainly feel free to ask those questions, and I can take those in consideration when I record that video, but I'm probably not going to respond directly to those ones in this video's comment section, because I'll save that for the other video talking about combat, spells, and so on. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I'm really surprised by how much nostalgia I feel going back and looking at some of this stuff again. It's really kind of strange, I'm not going to lie. I never thought I'd be here, but here I am, and I'm enjoying it more than I really thought I was going to. So I guess that's a good sign, and hopefully it'll be a good time when it comes time to run the D&D 3.5 game, which is coming up in about a couple weeks' time from the time that I'm recording this. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you tune in for the next one where I go over some more of the major differences. Again, just the big noticeable stuff. There's so many little differences that it could take forever to go through, but just some of the major things I'll touch on in a few future videos. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Take care.